Father Michael is running late, I believe, so we're going to get started with an opening prayer. I think most of you are familiar, but in case we have any guests here tonight, the restrooms are in the narthex and to your left as you're walking out. We're going to have a break in around 7, and at that point, after the 10-minute break, Jenny and Darren will be meeting with the high school youth out in the narthex, and the rest of us will be here with Tim to finish up with questions, answers, and closing remarks. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Weisensall. Oh, Colin, okay. You didn't have any other introductory things? Okay, all right. So Colin is going to lead us in our opening prayer. You can come on up.
This is a prayer for troubled times by Barbara Blossom. O God, in these troubled, uncertain times, we commit ourselves to peace. We remember that each thought has the power to inspire action, and that the actions we take can transform the lives of all those around us, all those whom they encounter, and ultimately the world. We will not make room in our hearts for hatred or intolerance. Instead, we live in joy and wonder, marveling at your beautiful creation, especially our sisters and brothers from other lands near and far. We ask you for strength, vision, and perseverance to reject violence in all its forms as we lovingly work towards justice for all of your children. We trust in your ways, dear God, and we ask you to inspire us as individuals, leaders, and nations to create a glorious community that embraces and celebrates life. Amen.
So welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. And thank you, Colin, for the prayer. I'm here to introduce Tim Hall, our speaker. Tim has worked for the last 18 months as a justice promoter for the Racine Dominican sisters. And before coming to work for the sisters, he taught high school Latin and theology at various Catholic high schools, including St. Catherine's here in Racine. He also practiced law as a union-side labor litigator in Milwaukee. He holds a BA in classical languages from UW-Madison, an MA in theology from Notre Dame, and a law degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Welcome, Tim. We are glad you are here with us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. It was awfully considerate of the Packers to beat the Bears by 6 p.m. sharp so that we could be here without feeling like we were missing out on something. So let's get started. We're talking about global solidarity. My understanding is that you're engaged in some kind of survey of Catholic social teachings, and so this is a presentation that I originally developed for use at the Siena Retreat Center. They said, we want you to do a presentation as the final presentation of a series, and your topic is going to be global justice. And I really struggled, like, what do you do with a topic like that? And I decided, well, let's talk about how hard it is to wrap our heads around global justice. And I appreciated that our opening prayer referred to working for justice. And so in a world with so many problems, sometimes it's hard to get off the blocks, so to speak. It's hard to figure out, there are so many problems, what do I do? So we're gonna start with that. How do we, so the word solidarity asks for the preposition with, solidarity with. And so we're going to be talking about how do we get ourselves in the kind of emotional space where we feel like we can actually be in solidarity with people we've never met, people we may never meet. So that's how we're going to approach this. So I'm going to start with our modern predicament, which is the reality of compassion fatigue. So once upon a time, The Onion, a satirical newspaper, was printed actually on paper, back when you read the news on paper. And very, very funny paper. And in the lower left corner is a headline, a little gag obituary for a roadkill squirrel. Okay, roadkill squirrel, remembered as frantic, indecisive. And here we have a squirrel like trying to figure out what to do with the stoplight. So you've all had that experience driving and the squirrel doesn't seem to know what to do. That's like us when we're bombarded with all this crisis information from the 24-hour news cycle. We end up in a space where we don't know what to do. There's so many problems. What can we possibly do about them? So that's what we're going to be talking about. And so the reason I call it a theory from, I don't know if I'm doing this right, sorry. A theory from evolutionary biology, okay? Now what do I mean by that? Okay, we are not yet evolved to handle this 24-hour news cycle. We, for millennia, we dealt with information on a much smaller scale. Smaller geographic area, far fewer number of people. And so now, with these devices in our pockets pinging at us all the time, we have access to information about things that happen, both bad and good, around the globe, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we are a successful species because we developed very sensitive threat detectors. And so, kind of like the squirrel, who has not yet evolved to handle motor vehicles coming at them at however many miles an hour, we have not yet evolved to handle this bombardment of bad news from around the world. So, it makes sense that we are having difficulties with things like depression and anxiety because our threat detection systems are being overloaded. And so that's part of our problem in trying to figure out how to get off the blocks in taking action rather than just worrying. So I think an important part of what I'm trying to do here today is talk about how we can wrap our heads around this predicament where there's so many problems and we feel like, I'm only one person, what can I do? And so we're going to be talking about solidarity in the service of doing justice and correcting what Pope Francis calls an imbalance in the world. Some of us here, are very privileged, very fortunate. We have running water at our command, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, lights whenever we want them. Food is not a big deal to go get. And so we sit at the pinnacle of global privilege, but not everybody shares that level of privilege. What can we do about that? Very sensitive clicker. Okay, so what kind of conduct is expected of us? I'm going to approach this dilemma through the lens of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Hopefully a familiar parable to us from the Gospel of Luke. And we're going to use this parable as an entry point into this dilemma. How do we take action so that we, at the end of our lives, don't look back and think we didn't do enough? So this is the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke chapter 10. There was a scholar of the law who stood up to test him being Jesus, and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He said in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus replied to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But because he wished to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied with a story. And so this is a parable. A parable is a story that is with a twist to the ending, designed to get you to think differently. Jesus replied, "A man fell victim to robbers as he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion." Let's remember that phrase, moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged him. Then he lifted him up on his own animal and took him to an inn and cared for him. My apologies. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, "Take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on my way back." Which of these 3, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim? He answered, "The one who treated him with mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Another line we need to remember. Go and do likewise. So, our cast of characters. A scholar of the law is an expert in the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, what we tend to call the Old Testament, Hebrew scriptures. Most likely one of these people that the Gospels call a scribe. They're professional religious guys. And the priest and Levite, they are in charge of public worship. The Levite is a member of the tribe of Levi from the tribe that runs the temple. Very important people. And they are bound by purity laws. So they're like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's bleeding in the road. I've got to go to the temple and give sacrifice. If I touch him and help him, then I'm ritually impure." And so they're caught up in systems that prevent them from helping this guy. So what is a Samaritan? So Samaria, the land that these people are from, was originally the northern kingdom of Israel. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire, very aggressive, very hostile, very brutal empire, conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, deported all the craftsmen and educated classes, and imported a lot of Assyrian peasantry to populate the area. So the Israelites who were still in the region intermarried with these Assyrians and developed a religion that was similar to, but also different from, the Judaism of the time. So the Jews worshipped at the temple in Jerusalem. The Samaritans worshipped on their holy mountain, the Samaritans. And so they all followed Moses and the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But the fact remains that the Samaritan man was both a religious other and a racial other. So this is humanity reaching across 2 different very important boundaries. So what are our takeaways from the parable? Neighborly love extends to all. We're obligated to love everybody. Inclusion over casuistry. What is casuistry? That's when you get kind of cute with your argumentation, because the man with whom Jesus had this conversation in the parable was saying, "Oh, okay, I've got to love my neighbor, but who's my neighbor exactly, Jesus? I want to kind of like, limit my damage here. Help me figure out the limitations of my obligation here." No, everybody is your neighbor, is the message of the parable. And it's love over legalism. We want to be moved with compassion and not removing ourselves to the opposite side when we see somebody who is in need. And another takeaway is we are all obligated to help those in need. Do this and you will live is a line that's very important from the story, and go and do likewise. So these are commands from Jesus himself. This should cause us to listen more carefully to the story when Jesus says, go and do likewise. Do this and you will live. The parable removes boundaries on who is qualified to receive love of neighbor. There can't be any qualifications of this. It's a cornerstone of Jesus' call for a liberated humanity, a humanity that is liberated from divisions. And another takeaway is that the moral law obliges all who can manage safe travel on the road to Jericho. So we are people who can travel safely. Our lives are generally very safe. And this story is telling us that we have the obligation to help people whose lives are more perilous. And this was a very radical idea for first century Judeans. So that's what the Romans called them, the Judeans. Words like Jew and Judaism come from that word. And okay, so how can compassionate Samaritanism, because that's what we're talking about here, compassionate Samaritanism, how can it promote global solidarity? How can we be in solidarity with people around the globe? That seems like a tall order. And this clicker, unfortunately, skipped the definition that I had of solidarity. So let's backtrack a bit, sorry. Solidarity is a firm, persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. It's not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, both near and far. So this is Pope John Paul II in Solicitudo Rei Socialis, a papal document from the late 80s. And so we don't want vague compassion. That's an oxymoron. There can't be any such thing as vague compassion because the word compassion has the word passion in it. It's to suffer with someone. So passion can mean something romantic, yes, but it also means to experience or to suffer. And so that's why we talk about Jesus' passion on the cross, his suffering on the cross, his experiencing of that, of his sufferings. So we want passionate compassion. We don't want vague compassion. We don't want shallow distress. We want profound distress. There are people in trouble, and we need to be in distress over that. But we don't want the kind of distress that paralyzes us, and that's where an authentic, productive compassion comes in, because it's my belief, and this is not like something that I figured out. It's something that I've gotten from books, from good theology books. Compassion is an emotion, yes, and a sentiment, yes, but it also offers us an entry point into effective action. Because we can have sympathy, we can sympathize with somebody. Oh, that's really terrible that happened to you. That's an emotion without action. We can engage in charity, so that's helping somebody, but not necessarily with emotional engagement. We want to be emotionally engaged. We want to lead with our heart. We want to be passionate in the way we try to be a part of the solution and try to make sure that justice is done. Because boy, the world needs a lot more justice than it's got right now. So what the argument I'm making is that compassion can be a catalyst for true solidarity, okay? Solidarity with people halfway around the world who aren't as fortunate as we are, who need our help. And so what we want, though, is self-critical compassion. We don't want to be too, we don't want to presumptuously cast ourselves as the heroes of the story, because it's more complicated than that. Self-critical compassion sparks the kind of change among flourishing persons, and that's us. We're flourishing persons. We've got food, we've got water, we've got light, we've got heat in the winter and air conditioning in the summer. We're flourishing. We're like a healthy plant that's on a windowsill with lots of water and healthy soil. We want to spark the kind of change that leads to social change for the marginalized, people on the margins, people who are not as fortunate as we are, people who are in distress. So the problem is, taking the sufferings of others seriously can be difficult, it can be uncomfortable, and it can be self-incriminating. And theology that does this, that takes the sufferings of others seriously, that says, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong, everybody stop, there's some suffering going on here, and it's wrong for us to ignore it, that can be interruptive. It can be radical in the truest sense of the word. The word radical comes from the Latin word meaning root. That's why when we eradicate something, we root it out. That E prefix is short for X, so we root something out when we eradicate it. When we are radicals, we go back to the roots of our faith tradition. So taking the sufferings of others seriously is radical. It gets back to the root, the big impetus of Christianity. People got enthused about Christianity because it took the sufferings of the poor seriously. Wow, here's a group of people who are really serious about helping. But the problem is it can also be dangerous. And so the art I chose for this slide, if you practice this kind of theology, they might kill you. And that's what they did with Jesus. Okay, so how can compassionate Samaritanism promote global solidarity? Because that's what we want. We want to use our good fortune to try to make things better in the true sense of solidarity. We want to commit ourselves to the common good. How can compassionate Samaritanism promote that? It can help us recognize the connection between our privilege and others' lack of it. Our society uses by far in excess of our fair share of resources. The reality, and because others' lack of resources is connected to our abundance of resources, and that's the imbalance that Pope Francis talks about. There's an imbalance in the world right now. It's like when you load the washing machine too heavily on one side and the whole thing starts rocking back and forth. That's what's happening with the world right now, because there are those many who have so little, and we few who have so much. But we're trapped in our own systems. It's important not to beat ourselves up, but recognize that we are at a certain level complicit in the problem. And so that means that we are obligated to try to make things better. The reality is that some are not, it helps us recognize that some people are just not able to pull themselves up out of the ditch beside the road to Jericho. Okay, we can't soothe ourselves by saying, they just need to, kind of pull themselves out of that ditch. Not everybody can. And that's just the sad reality. Compassionate Samaritanism can also help us recognize the fact that those in the ditch are victims of economic exclusion and social marginalization through no fault of their own. It really should not be the case. It's a sad fact of fallen humanity that some of us are very fortunate just by dumb luck, being born where we were born. And even within the United States, that's true. Depending on what zip code you're born into, your life might be very different from somebody who's born just a couple zip codes over. We need to recognize that some people are marginalized, socially and economically excluded. Okay, so challenges to compassionate Samaritanism. White privilege, first world privilege. We have social entitlement that we have not earned. And individualism. It's in the air we breathe. We are in a very individualistic society. And that brings us a lot of good things, but it also poses some problems. Because we are so individualistic, we have so many choices, so much control over our own personal destinies that sometimes it's hard for us to plug into the common good kind of mindset. Sometimes it's hard for us as individuals who have a lot of discretion and a lot of decision-making power to remember that we are all connected, like leaves on a tree. And so sometimes, and we can think of the pandemic as a time like this, sometimes we have a difficult time thinking in terms of the common good of the entire group rather than our own individual rights. That's a challenge we face in terms of how we think, our reflexive ways of thinking. Another challenge to the practice of compassionate Samaritanism, the kind that leads to global solidarity with the less fortunate, is bourgeois Christianity. And I just have to smile when I say that word bourgeois, because I feel like such a 1960s radical when I say that. Bourgeois, the bourgeois. But there is a type of Christianity that perpetuates the comfort of the status quo with an excessive focus on personal piety. Christianity, sometimes it becomes a matter of, well, I hold all the right opinions. That makes me a Christian. That makes me a good person. It has to be more than that. Okay, we're called upon to not only have faith, but to act upon that faith. And sometimes, if we focus excessively on our personal sin, we lose sight of the fact that we're supposed to be helping others. And so that's another danger of individualism, is that individualism that we are born into in this society and live and breathe and walk through every day affects the way we think of our faith. We think, yeah, it's just me and Jesus. And as long as I'm good with Jesus, I'm good. But the church throughout the millennia has thought of itself as a people. The people of God in relation to God, in relation to Christ. Not just a one-on-one kind of personal Lord and Savior sort of focus. So we're talking about a corporate Christianity. We're talking about a collective Christianity, a communitarian vision of people feeling connected and being obligated by those connections to help each other when that help is needed. There's a type of moral therapeutic deism, okay, where an example of that is the prosperity gospel. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, the prosperity gospel, you can get that sometimes if you tune in to, I don't even know if they still have these church services on television on Sundays like they did when I was younger. But you've got these preachers on television preaching, hey, just pray hard and get rich. If you pray hard enough, God will bless you and he'll fill your wallet full of cash. And there was a movie, it was called Facing the Giants, about a downtrodden football coach. His marriage was in trouble. His truck had just broken down. He was in danger of losing his job, his part-time job as a football coach. But he found Christ and everything got better. A grateful donor to the school bought him a new truck, and things got better with his wife, and the team started winning. But in life, it doesn't really work like that, okay? And so that movie, in my mind, is a perfect example of the prosperity gospel kind of vision of Christianity, which it poses a challenge to practicing the kind of authentic Samaritanism that leads to global solidarity with the less fortunate, that leads to the passionate compassion, that leads to action. We don't just want to sympathize with people. Oh, that's too bad. I'm just going to change the channel here, find something more entertaining than the latest disaster. We don't want to just practice a dispassionate sort of charity. which is good works, separate from emotional engagement. So those are some challenges to the practice of this type of solidarity that we want. So what are we going to do? The effects of the present imbalance, and this is a quote from Pope Francis's Laudato Si, his encyclical on care for creation, and his environmental encyclical. The effects of the present imbalance can only be reduced by our decisive action. So here we have the first letter of John, chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. The way we came to know love was that he laid down his life for us, so we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. If someone who has worldly means sees a brother in need and refuses him compassion, how can the love of God remain in him? Children, let us love not in word or speech, but in deed and truth. So we're talking about living our faith in deed and truth. What does a response from authentic solidarity look like? Our response should examine and transform structures, institutions and systems that create wealth for the few, but deny even basic human rights to the many. So, that's all we have to do. We just need to transform structures. Simple, right? But the thing is, if that seems like an excessively tall order, how can I transform structures, systems, and institutions? How could I possibly do that? But that's individualism talking. People working together can do amazing things. History is full of events and developments where a very small group of very determined and visionary people work together to change the system. And we are learning that history is not as linear as we've been taught. Archaeologists are making very, very interesting discoveries that are revealing that there are civilizations in history that were slave states that threw off their chains and became more egalitarian just because they decided they wanted to. So we tend to learn in school that societies just get more complex. We all started out in caves, and then we end up in these really complex civilizations. But the path has been much more wandering than that, than we've been led to believe. We can change the system if we work together, if we're determined, if we defer to visionary people that know how to get it done. And so we want to change the system so that all these privileges stop flowing to just a very few people. Our world is so full of an abundance of resources that everybody really should be able to live well. But we're having difficulties doing that because of the present imbalance. How can we override consumerism's tendency to make treasure the default disaster response? What do I mean by that? The typical American response to when we hear about a disaster is to say, how can I help? Well, the most common way that we are offered to help is by giving money. And so that's what I mean here by treasure. It's our standard default response. Unfortunately, that's a consumerist type of, believe me, there are organizations that need our money, don't get me wrong. But it can't be our only response because it kind of perpetuates ourselves. It becomes a way for us to go about our lives not helping people, and we learn of a disaster, we shell out a little bit of money, and we continue going about our way without exerting the effort to end the system, change the system that results in these disasters. So how do we override consumerism's tendency to make treasure the default disaster response? We do this by marshaling these equally necessary resources. So money, treasure, is a necessary resource. But there are other things that are also necessary. Physical presence, being with people. And when I say that, I recall the scene in the book of Job where all these disasters befall Job. And his friends come and they visit him, and the first thing they do is just sit with him in silence. Okay, that's physical presence. They are there with him. Okay? Now, as soon as they start talking to him, that's when they start messing up. But they start things off the right way. They make themselves physically present. Okay? If you have a close friend, a disaster befalls him or her, you don't necessarily need to come up with the right thing to say. You're just there with them. You are being compassionate. You are suffering with them. And that's what Christ did for us. He suffers with us. What else can we offer besides treasure and physical presence? Friendship and accompaniment. And this is a very important word to Pope Francis. Accompaniment. And I really like the way he talks about accompaniment with reference to young people, the most important members of our audience tonight. He talks about accompaniment. He's not talking about being didactic. In other words, you know how adults tend to talk at you, kind of tell you what's what. Pope Francis rather emphasizes the virtue of accompaniment, walking with people. And so that's what we can do. We can be friends to people. We can accompany them. We can use our moral imagination, and we can use our truth-telling, which is the most important function of theology, is telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's self-incriminating, even when it might be a little bit dangerous. Because there are some uncomfortable truths out there. We live, the technology's, it's funny because it makes the world seem smaller and bigger at the same time. You can go to they used to call it Google Earth. I don't know what they're calling it now, but you can just zoom out of your own neighborhood and wheel around to the other side of the hemisphere and zoom in on a place where life is very, very different. And I don't know if we would accept that if that were in our neighborhood, okay? If the house next door were on fire, would we close our doors to the neighbor who comes knocking at our door because their house just burned down? But that's all too often what we do on a global scale, is we try to wall out people in distress whose houses are burning, literally. And so we need to tell the truth about that, and we need to use our moral imagination. So we want to practice radical interruptive resistance. We want to resist therapeutic deism. We want to engage in compassionate action, not just a belief in compassion. I think it's important to be compassionate toward people. That's sympathy. That is emotional engagement without action. And we gotta watch out for the doom scrolling. Okay, I don't know if that's still the fashionable term, but I know that I fall into that pit sometimes, where you're just kind of scrolling through news items and it seems like it's all bad. And then you need a break from the news, and you really don't engage with any of it. You just kind of end up depressed. And so what we need to do is practice mindfulness in our news consumption. We need to make sure we're not constantly skimming, and we need to focus, have a little more mindfulness in the way we consume our news. If I had the answer on how to consume news without getting bummed out, I would offer it to you, but I don't. I'm still struggling with that myself. Part of my position in working for the sisters is knowing what's going on, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard to find out what's wrong in the world and to feel like you can't do anything about it. But be mindful in your news consumption. Know when you are just skimming and when you're not really engaging in the news. And sometimes it is important to take a break from it. And we need to get involved. But how? How can we get involved? So there are lots of organizations to get involved with. There is Racine Interfaith Coalition right here in Racine, making sure that people have access to their voting rights. The parent organization of Racine Interfaith Coalition is called Wisdom, and it's the state organization that engages in activities like that. There is Expo of Wisconsin. It's a group of formerly incarcerated people who are trying to help those who have been incarcerated integrate into life on the outside, making sure that they're aware of their voting rights, if any. There's the Friends Committee on National Legislation, otherwise known as the Quakers. They are a very peace-oriented organization that trains people on how to talk to legislators. And so if any of you are interested in politics, that's a great organization to get involved with, because they go out of the way to train everybody from all walks of life, including young people, on how to gain access to your legislators and make your voices heard. There's also Network Lobby. That's a Catholic organization of religious sisters. You may recall a decade or so ago, they were behind the Nuns on the Bus campaign that was trying to protect people's health care. There's the Poor People's Campaign, which was a vision from Dr. Martin Luther King, and so that organization still exists today. There's Catholic Climate Covenant, which is a very youth-oriented organization that is working to implement Pope Francis's vision on the climate crisis, because we want our planet to still be around for our great-great-grandchildren, and Catholic Climate Covenant is doing a great job of getting the word out and training young people on how to make a difference and making sure that we don't completely trash the globe. So there are, and so that photo, some of you may not be old enough to know the Brady Bunch, but that's Marsha Brady when she signed up for all the clubs and drove herself crazy on the first day of school because she signed up for too many different things. And so when I gave this presentation at the Siena Retreat Center, I had a question. The question was, how do you decide what issue you should follow up on? Because there's so many different things to try to do. And my answer was, I think that getting involved is kind of like working out. What's the best workout? It's the one that you actually do. So just focus on what you like to do. That's the best workout, because you'll actually do it. You won't dream up excuses as to why you can't that evening. So if there's a justice-oriented issue that you're interested in, it's kind of like when I was a teacher and young people would ask me, what should I major in? Well, what are you interested in? Because if you're interested in it, you're going to work harder at it. And it's not going to seem like work, and your grades are going to be better, and your major doesn't matter as much as you think it does. Because I had a lot of students ask me, well, if I want to be a lawyer, what should I major in? The answer is whatever you're interested in, because that means your GPA will be better, and that means you'll stand a better chance of getting admitted. So in surveying the number of possible different issues that you can get involved with, just whatever trips your trigger, whatever gets you excited about being involved, that's the one you should pursue. Oh, I know there's one more slide there somewhere. Okay. I clicked out of it, presentation mode somehow. There we go. But the question remains, can we change our world? And the answer is yes. The world has been changed by groups of determined people in the past. I read this absolutely amazing book. Well, I didn't read it. It's like 600 pages long or something crazy like that. I listened to it on audiobook. I thought it would never end, but it was very interesting. It's called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. And what I took away from this book is, and this is the book that I read that helped me learn how history has been a much more wandering path than I realized. We haven't just evolved unavoidably from living in caves to this ultra technological complex society. Humanity's taken a lot of left turns and U-turns in the process. We can build whatever society we want. So the ideas I came away from this book with were ideas do have power, okay? When a new idea comes along, sometimes it just changes the world all of a sudden like a wildfire changes a landscape. So never underestimate the power of human ideas. Reality is not individualistic in the real sense. We are so connected with each other, it's hard for us to even comprehend. Okay, scientists have discovered that when we cry in the presence of others, it sends out like hormonal signals. Like when you cry in somebody else's presence, it affects their thinking chemically. Like you send out these chemical signals, and it's very strange, but it's very true. We are all connected at a mystical level that we'll never fully understand in this world. The adversities we face are not insurmountable. We are not hurtling uncontrollably toward this disastrous end. And sometimes Christian theology kind of leads us to conclude that, oh yeah, it's all ending, it's all headed toward the apocalypse. But Jesus said he himself didn't even know when that was going to be. So we shouldn't think that way. Injustice does not have to be permanent. The world can change for the better, and we do have the ability to make that change. There have been civilizations in the past that have, where the people were groaning under the thumb of tyrants that just woke up one morning and decided, we're going to change things. This really isn't working for us. And so we can take inspiration from these ancient civilizations that have made these U-turns, that have made these sudden changes in the way they lived their lives. And we can do that too. So that's all I have. And so in conclusion, if we want to live our lives in solidarity with people who need our help, we need to practice a passionate type of compassion. And compassion, rather than being kind of an emotional dead end where we just feel bad and then seek a diversion in something else so we can forget about it, that, if you want to call it moral outrage, if you get angry, the Christian theologians call that righteous anger. Righteous anger. Okay, sometimes we get the feeling that, if we're Christians, we're not supposed to ever be angry. But there is righteous anger. And when people are being treated unfairly, we can channel that anger as an entry point into compassion. And compassion, when you are suffering with someone, you want to help them get better. You want to help solve their problems. And this can be a very proactive kind of faith tradition. And what I'm talking to you about almost seems like a lost form of Christianity these days. It seems like with Christianity getting so wrapped up in politics that it's kind of an overtly political form of Christianity that is getting all the headlines in the news, but it doesn't have to be that way. So let's try to be radical in terms of getting back to our roots and helping the poor and being in solidarity with people that need our help. Because we have the resources. We're the flourishing ones. We're the ones who can travel the road to Jericho safely. And there are those who are dying on that road. And so if we can marshal our resources to help those that need that help, then we can make a better world. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for hosting me. I appreciate it.
just get us started.
One of my former students from St. Catherine's was here.
Oh, really? Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to get started with the last little bit here. We're going to open it now for questions of Tim or reflections or comments or thoughts on your presentation. And I first want to say thank you very much. It was very good. And I'm kind of reminded of the homily today, Father's homily about the Epiphany, because some of what you presented was kind of an epiphany. We didn't necessarily know all of that. But he encouraged us this morning to be seekers like the wise men. And that's kind of what we're doing in the Human Concerns Committee right now, is we're learning as much as we can about Catholic social teaching. That's what we've been doing this whole year in these sessions, but we're using it to kind of educate ourselves, to seek knowledge, to seek understanding, and then to look at moving us ahead towards action. And so Tim was able to share some ways for us to do that and the mindset that we need to have to do that. But Father said this morning, and I can't remember who you quoted, but it's someone who said 9/10 of the success is just showing up. Woody Allen, thank you, Father. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you and everybody who's on the live stream, because you did show up. And this was a hard day to show up with the Packers playing. So we did show up. So we're 9/10 of the way there. I suspect the remaining 1% is probably the really, really difficult part. But together we can do it. And I think that's the other message that I took. Together we can do it. So I'll open it to you. Do you have questions? Do you have concerns or reflections? Father Michael?
Just one comment to make. When you were talking about being faced with all the multiple opportunities to show solidarity in many different ways throughout the many different places of the world, and how to choose what direction you might like to go in, the thought that crossed my mind was, give yourself 2 years. Try different avenues. And if you find one within that time frame that you really find yourself drawn to, that's the one you latch on to and move in that direction.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I've only worked for the sisters for 1.5 years, and I'm still learning the ropes. I've been my career's been split between lawyering and teaching, and neither of those jobs get you out and about much. You tend to be at your desk a lot, and so I'm still figuring out what I'm best at or what I'm most drawn to. Because, there's just a lot of different ways to go. And I really like the point Susan made about showing up, because that's 9/10 of it. It's just showing up and making yourself available for something to happen. And the showing up part reminds me of a scene. I was a young father, and I was watching Terminator 2. And there's this scene where the robot is fixing a truck, and he has befriended this kid character. And the kid keeps asking him all these questions, and the robot's just making one-word answers. And I realized, that's it. That's like the key to fatherhood. Show up and answer questions. And that's what I meant by we make gifts of ourselves. When we accompany people, when we show up. Because giving money can be so impersonal. Okay, I saw more than one hand. Yes, Greg.
Yeah, Tim, you talked a lot about the compassion and trying to see the pain that others are in, and have compassion, but it seems like to me what really is difficult in our country today, it seems like the divisiveness is just getting to such proportions that it's hard for people to come together in many ways, you know, to have that compassion, to identify with others. Any thoughts on that, comments on that whole thing that we're struggling with now in our own communities and as a nation?
That's a great question because it ties in with showing up. I drive my kids nuts. Well, at least I used to before they grew up and like abandoned me. But I always insist on going into the restaurant, not doing the drive-through, going into the bank, not doing the drive-through ATM. And people just need to be together physically again. When's the last time outside of church that you sang with other people? It hardly ever happens anymore because it's so reliant on recorded music. And our economy seems to have found that it is more profitable to isolate us than it is to bring us together. So think about all the bookstores that have closed. Think about all the video arcades that have closed. There's nowhere for kids to hang out anymore because I guess it's just not profitable enough. And so we need to resist atomization. We need to be together so that we find those commonalities. Because there's a couple that lives next door to my house, and the political signs in their yard are not the political signs that I would put in my yard, but they're wonderful people. I know they're good people. And so I know that because I speak to them in person. If I were just driving by and seeing their signs, I might draw very different conclusions about them personally just by making certain assumptions about what they were going to be like based on their political beliefs. But when we come into contact with people personally, we find much more common ground than when we are flaming them online in the comments section. And it just seems like the comment sections of websites are in the same neighborhood as like road rage, where we get behind the wheel and all of a sudden we have different attitudes than when we're not separated from other people in these machines of glass and steel. And so we need to find ways to come together again, and that's also part of the reasoning underlying my recommendation that we moderate our news content, because it's I learned a useful phrase. There are these people and they are conflict entrepreneurs. So it's more profitable to get people arguing online. It's more clicks, meaning more advertising revenue. And so it's profitable to start arguments online. And so that's the kind of doom loop that we're stuck in, is that we're doing too much interaction online rather than in person. Because when you're with somebody, when you're with somebody and you're in their physical presence, it's much harder to say something nasty or dismissive or insulting than it would be if you were in their presence. And so I think that we have to realize that the media a lot of the times wants us to be angry at other people. If you go, I'm an old person, so I'm on Facebook. I'm not on TikTok. And so you watch those Facebook reels, and I noticed a new genre of Facebook reel, and that is the fake Karen videos, where they get some actress to play some obnoxious, entitled woman. And it's completely fake, but I feel myself getting angry anyway. And they want you to be angry. They want you to be outraged. And we just have to be willing to unplug from that, at least often enough so that we're still grounded in reality. And we need to find ways of taking a subversive attitude toward an economy that keeps wanting to isolate us from each other and erase the places where we used to come together. Because apparently, having a public pool run by the county, the entertainment industry doesn't want those because that's not profitable enough. They want to charge people to come jump on our trampoline together or whatever. It seems like the only gathering places you have anymore are the ones that are really expensive to access. And that means that leaves a lot of people out, and that's where the economic marginalization comes in. So I think unplugging, coming together in person, accompanying one another, reaching out in friendship, and just doing things in person. It's getting harder, but we need to think subversively in that way. Yeah.
So, what are your suggestions for processing the news, I guess? There is a lot of social injustice out there and a lot of sadness. So, like you turn on the TV and there's, you have a war going on in Russia, Ukraine, you have the Middle East, you have people seeking asylum in the United States, everywhere there's a national disaster. And you kind of talk about making sure that you don't just ignore all that. But in some of those, it becomes a challenge to think what you do beyond treasure. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are with processing the news that's up in the world.
As I mentioned earlier, if I had the solution, I'd offer it. If I had a 5-step plan to unplugging from the news and being free of the psychological suffering that it causes, I would share it with you. But I don't. But I think that that there are people and organizations out there that are working to make things better. And the trick is finding these organizations and doing what you can to integrate yourself into them. Wisconsin doesn't really, it seems like Wisconsin hasn't quite stepped up to the plate yet when it comes to giving people ways to help immigrants and asylum seekers yet. But Illinois, like that's Chicago's where thousands of people are getting off buses every week. And these people are coming from all over the world. They're not just coming from south of the border anymore. People are flying to Central America from Africa and then crossing the border. So these people are now coming from all over the world. And immigration was never a big focus of mine until I came to work for the sisters. And I found motivation to do that kind of work after working for a couple of years, teaching at a school that was entirely comprised of Mexican students, and finding out what their lives really are like and the kind of terror they live under, the threat of being deported at any time. But Illinois, there's some organizations that are really doing it. I mean, there's Viator House, and the priest who is the executive director of Viator House is coming to Siena early next month to give a presentation because Father Corey is operating a home for young male asylum seekers who have aged out of the juvenile detention system. So unaccompanied minors end up in juvenile detention. That's something that I didn't know. That doesn't seem quite right. But when they age out, all too often they're just like dumped out on the street, like good luck. And so Father Corey's operating a home where these young men get support, they get a place to live, they get 3 hots and a cot, so to speak, and they get job training, coaching, and that kind of thing. So there's Father Corey, he's doing it. And so I'm bringing him up and having him talk to the sisters, and we're going to brainstorm about how can we get something like that going here. And I'm kind of new on the job, so I'm still trying to figure out ways to do that. Like, not just get somebody to come give a talk, but replicate what they're doing. Like, how do you get from one point to the next? And a lot of times you're just making it up as you go along. It reminds me of parenthood. Like, man, I was making it up as I went along. I didn't know what I was doing. But somehow it worked out. All my kids are thriving and getting along in the world, and we're still on speaking terms and all that, even though most of them live so far away. And so we make it up as we go along, and we make it up as we go along together. And we find ways. And so hopefully next year at this time, I'll be coming back and maybe talking about how we made things better by creating a new Viator House North, So I'll use that as an example.
I think one thing that Tim would probably concur with is that I kind of felt that way too, kind of overwhelmed at one point. And one thing that I always used to teach when I was working in mission integration was the importance of aligning yourself with good and trusted people who care about some of the same things that you care about, but you can't necessarily take care of it on your own. And so I think that's kind of what we found through our relationship with Rick as well. And the other thing is that unusual circumstances like what we're living in right now demand extraordinary responses. And it's easier to do that in a group than it is individually to be overwhelmed. And that gets back again to today's homily. I thought it was really good, Father. He gave us 3 things to think about, and one of them was welcoming the vision of who God really is, and that Jesus is in everyone we meet, not just the people we like to help because we know them and we care about them, but also the people that we don't know and who maybe we don't like all that much, are the face of God. And then to show ourselves as Jesus in our world, just as Jesus did for us when he came on that first Christmas. So in thinking about walking in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, you gave us really great ideas. And I think combining the message of this morning with the message of this evening, there's probably a lot we can do. And I'll end just before a closing prayer by saying one thing that you could do, and I wish that the youth were still here so that I could invite them, but you can take the message back. We would love to have more people join us at our Human Concerns Committee meetings. We would love it. Not so much that we have all the answers and that we know what we're doing next. We're kind of in a growing learning mode right now through all these sessions with people like Tim helping us to identify how we need to do what we need to do. So that's where we're at. We would love it if you would come and join us and let us know what you think maybe we need to focus on. We're doing a really great job. Today was Sharing Sunday at our parish. We collected a lot. We do a lot of those things exceedingly well, thanks to the people who organize that and coordinate it so well. But there are some other pressing needs that we probably should be addressing in our own community and maybe in our own parish that we're not aware of. And we can't do that if we're operating in little individual cells. We need to come together. And so I think even having the youth come to Human Concerns Committee meetings would be great so that we could hear maybe some of the things that they're doing in the high schools to meet the human concern needs of kids who are at the high school or in the community. We know they're doing a lot of good things, and that would be good discussion for us as well. So we meet every other month from 6 until 7:30, and we have been trying to meet in person. We kind of got over the COVID thing, and we're meeting together, except next month, February is our next meeting, and we are meeting on Zoom. because we just thought maybe the weather's finally going to be bad. So we're going to meet on Zoom. So there's really not a whole lot of excuse, because in order to show up, all you got to do is click on the link and we'll all be together at that next meeting. So if you have any questions about it, we'll try to get more in the bulletin about it. I think that's one thing we need to do. But people who are on the committee, my husband John, Mary, Amy is our vice chair, Greg, Deacon Greg, anybody else? Who? Oh, Jenny, for sure, yeah. Jenny did a lot for tonight, and so we really appreciate that, and everyone who helped us tonight. And then our liaison from the PPC is Mark, and we really appreciate that as well, because he's taking information back and forth for us. So hopefully we're through about 4 of the 7 Catholic social teaching themes, and we're working towards what would we like to do next. So come and join us, we'd like that. And again, thank you, Tim, very much.
Thank you.
And we have a closing prayer. Mary, are you doing that, or who's got the closing prayer? Well, maybe I do. I thought Jenny had asked someone to do it. But sure. We'll close with, this is the prayer of the refugee. Lost in the tempests out on the open seas, our small boats drift. We seek for land during endless days and endless nights. We are the foam floating on the vast ocean. We are the dust wandering in endless space. Our cries are lost in the howling wind. Without food, without water, our children lie exhausted until they cry no more. We thirst for our land, but are turned back from every shore. Our distress signals rise, and then rise again, but the passing ships do not stop. How many boats have perished? How many families lie beneath the waves? Lord Jesus, do you hear the prayer of our flesh? Lord, do you hear our voice from the abyss of death? O solid shore, we long for you. We pray for humankind to be present today. We pray that hope be given us today from any land. Amen. All right, thank you, and have a good rest of the night.